Good afternoon, classmates. This presentation is based on my topic paper, which is Teacher Training and Behavior Change Efficacy. And it looks at what the literature says about FBA, BIP process, effectiveness in the school setting. And my name is Adam Tim. So the main question that the paper addresses is how are teachers trained to perform FBAs and how that impacts the quality of behavior intervention plans or BIPs and positive student behavior outcomes. So what do we know about this? So the literature says that we know that teachers struggle with the application of BIPs in a way that makes behavior change real, problematic for educators. So how this actually takes place in my setting is that BIPs often end up just a piece of paper. And what that means is it takes people to actually implement the strategies written on those pieces of paper in order for the behavior change to occur. And data collection needs to happen as we're implementing these behavior change processes. As most of us know, especially if we work in education settings, that IDEA, or the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, advocates for the use of the functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan process as part of that federal legislation, especially as it pertains to students with disabilities. And then Scott et al. 2005, and their study suggests that if an FBA is being implemented, it should be done by trained professionals to work best in school settings. So people who are not trained in the process, they can participate, but they should not be the main ones facilitating or conducting a functional behavior assessment or writing a behavior intervention plan. So to that end, Scott et al. 2005 pointed out that the FBA process has three main flaws in school settings. They're often used to address the consequences of the behavior as opposed to the antecedent situations that set the stage for the behavior to occur. So it ends up more of a reactionary process as opposed to preventative process. And then if it's done by a highly trained individual, then sometimes teachers who are more close to the student in that educational setting don't get to provide as much input face to face with that person writing the plan or implementing the behavior, functional behavior assessment, or writing that plan. And then when the FBA is conducted in highly controlled environments, especially like when you're doing the FA or functional analysis, then the technology that around how you're manipulating the behavioral antecedents, or if you're doing a structural analysis, and if you're doing a functional analysis, manipulating those consequences so that you're turning behavior on and off, then that becomes known by very few people in the school setting. They're not familiar with the behavior analytic approaches that are used by highly trained individuals. And so the conclusion of the Scott et al. 2005 study was that people need to be trained strategically in the selection of function-based interventions or antecedent-based interventions, so that when they come up with their behavior intervention plans, they're more precise and they actually address the function. So teacher preparedness. Allday, Nelson, and Russell 2011 noted that teachers have reported in some cases that they were not properly equipped to utilize the FBA methodology. In my experience, most general education teachers who I work with have no idea how a functional behavior assessment is done, and to some end, seems like they are rather disengaged with all of the minutia that it takes, because it can be a very lengthy process, and that is reflected in the research that notes that teachers feel unequipped, and the data shows that they're unequipped. And when this happens and behaviors occur in the classroom, um, students are more likely to be excluded from general education environments. And then teachers also do not provide much input as needed for the data collection and don't have sufficient training on intervention selection, which we talked about earlier. All right, so that is what we know. But some of that also reflects barriers that we have. So teachers, we know, struggle with selecting the correct function of the behavior. Trussell et al. 2008 show strategies that manipulating antecedent characteristics of a classroom, such as increasing the ratio of positive feedback, provide for the display of exemplar work and creating a visual daily schedule based on the functional needs of attention will reduce the occurrence of problem behavior. This particular study was done with relation to students with emotional and behavioral disorders. And a lot of teachers already use those things, but don't correctly attach those strategies with the function. So if it's not an attention-based function, then of course the problematic behavior is not going to decrease, right? So we want to make sure that we're matching the strategy to the actual function of the behavior. And then All Day and colleagues 2011 assert that there's a lot of evidence to show that school-based implementation of functional behavior assessment procedures suffer from a lack of fidelity, meaning that maybe not all of the steps in the functional behavior assessment are followed. I know in my district, not a lot of people are conducting functional analysis. We're not testing that hypothesis of function to make sure that we're actually we actually have correctly identified the challenging behavior, and it occurs when negative reinforcement is at play, or they're trying to avoid some aversive stimuli, or we're positively reinforcing attention, and then we're getting maybe an aversive impact on us as the educator. So those things need to be tested to make sure that we're correctly identifying functions. Some additional barriers is that the process is just very long. I know in our class, I forget which specific EDSE course, but we had to actually perform a functional behavior assessment and functional analysis on a fake client, and that document was 50 pages long. And if you work in the school setting, some of us might be familiar with IEPs, not just the snapshot, but the actual entire document, which can be in excess of 20 pages. And so functional behavior analysis, if properly done, and a behavior intervention plan together, can exceed 50 pages of just paperwork and documentation. And so the data collection can take a very long time to compile. And then a lot of people don't have the skills to perform a functional analysis or take appropriate time sampling data or match the data collection procedure to the actual problem. And so how do we close that? We need to train teachers on more behavior analytic principles such as positive behavior supports and differential reinforcement. We need to provide feedback and coaching to educators on conducting functional behavior assessment and developing behavior intervention plan. We need to train school staff and teachers how to make better functional hypotheses and test them using functional analysis, and then utilize the behavior support plan quality evaluation tool and the FACTS, or the functional assessment checklist, for teachers and staff as a fidelity measure when conducting functional assessment to make sure that we're providing for inter-observer reliability and treatment integrity, and some of the other factors that we need to make sure that we are honing in on when providing specific behavioral change. And then, so how can we use this information? As behavior analysts or people who are aspiring to be, we can use the behavior support plan quality evaluation tool and the FACTS when we are performing our functional behavior assessment and evaluating our behavior support plans that we put in place, and then train the teachers on effective strategy selection that matches the functional hypothesis. So if it's an escape maintain behavior, then we need to teach the students some appropriate ways to access that escape. Or if it's positive reinforcement maintained, then we need to teach students how to appropriately access those positive reinforcement contingencies. And that concludes the presentation for today. Hopefully you gained as much as I did from this presentation.